Last headline is it's Friday.
It is Friday.
This
Don't
week
underscore
felt like
that
three
one.
for some reason.
Yeah,
So much news, a lot going on. Happy you're with us. We all made it to the end of the week together. We begin this morning at the southern border, where migrants are now facing uncertainty and a new set of immigration laws hours after the expiration of that Title 42.
Yeah, just massive long lines of migrants have been building along the border for days now, people waiting in difficult conditions. Under the Trump-era policy of Title 42, migrants who tried to enter the country during the pandemic were turned away. And after Title 42 ended at midnight, border officials loaded with more people who made it into the U.S., put them in vans to take them to processing centers, and then locked down the border. Many of the migrants don't know what lies ahead, and they are facing some tougher immigration policies, but they're still just desperate to get out of their countries.
I'm desperate. I just want one opportunity to get into the U.S. and explain my situation. I can't go back to Peru.
Well, border officials are expecting to see an influx of migrants trying to cross the border in the coming days. Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas issued this statement last night saying, quote, "The border is not open. People who do not use available lawful pathways to enter the U.S. now face tougher consequences." We want to begin our coverage this morning with NBC News reporter Bree Jackson in El Paso, Texas. Bree, good morning to you. So what are you seeing there today, now just a handful of hours after the expiration of Title 42?
Good morning, Stephen. Well, so far it's been a quiet morning here in El Paso, at least where we're standing. So as you can see behind me, there's the border fence between El Paso, Texas and Mexico. We have seen some law enforcement agents coming through here in their vehicles. We haven't seen any migrants coming through Gate 40 yet, but we do know that they have seen an increase in this community over the past several months. They've seen thousands of migrants coming in, and the mayor of El Paso tells me that they've been preparing for this day for months. They knew it was coming. He calls it preparing for the unknown, because there's a lot of uncertainty here. They're uncertain of how many migrants will come into their community. They're uncertain how they'll be able to handle the influx, but they know that it is going to happen. So this community is one of many border communities that are preparing for what's headed their way. El Paso, along with Brownsville and several other cities here in Texas, have already declared a state of emergency even before Title 42 was lifted.
And Bree, as you mentioned, we've been talking about Title 42 for such a long time now. And now that it's expired, the U.S. isn't just allowing all migrants into the country. Something called Title 8 will now kick in. Explain to us that, and what will the timeline be for people who are processed under that?
Yeah, so Stephen, now that Title 42 is ended, it goes to Title 8, and that's an immigration law that applies where migrants can apply to enter the U.S. in several different ways. But the key here, it also does carry penalties for those who make an unlawful entry. So immigration officials estimate that under Title 8, the processing time for migrants will be at least an hour. Under Title 42, we're told that it was closer to 30 minutes. And here's who's allowed in under Title 8. Now, up to 100,000 people from Guatemala, El Salvador, and Honduras will be allowed in. They will have to have family here in the U.S., and they must apply online. Now, also, 30,000 per month will be allowed from Venezuela, as well as Haiti, Nicaragua, and Cuba. They'll have to come by air and have a sponsor. But that's one of the key differences from between Title 42 and now Title 8, which is now being enforced.
All right, Bree Jackson, thanks so much.
Cities and towns along the border are facing an uncertain future this morning as they brace for that possible influx of people. Our coverage of this continues now with NBC News correspondent Guad Venegas and a closer look at how San Diego is preparing.
San Diego bracing for a historic rush of migrants. U.S. Customs and Border Protection conducting a readiness exercise at the San Isidro port of entry.
Attention.
Briefly shutting down operations and preparing for things to get even busier. Crowds of migrants have arrived at the border wall, waiting out the hours before the end of Title 42. Local officials saying the number of people south of the border is many times what they are used to.
There's 3,500 people sitting along that Tijuana border. Normally, a normal day is about 200 people.
hundreds here stuck in limbo attempting to request asylum.
They are in squalid conditions.
This woman showing us a ticket Border Patrol handed her nearly a week ago.
Tenemos que tener paciencia porque los albergues están saturados.
And so are the processing centers where these folks will be questioned. Immigration officers making the evaluation on whether or not they're allowed to remain in the U.S. for now.
Good afternoon.
The Biden administration making it clear that the change in policy would be swift and sending a message to those planning their arrival.
If anyone arrives at our southern border after midnight tonight, they will be presumed ineligible for asylum and subject to steeper consequences. We are conducting dozens of removal flights each week, and we continue to increase them.
This man from Nicaragua, who was waiting to get across since January, turned himself into Border Patrol and was expelled back to Mexico with his wife and daughter.
So he says he was never interviewed, he was detained, put in a vehicle, and then brought back.
Another saying that he would keep trying to cross the border even if he's expelled. For those allowed to stay in the U.S. after being processed, help will be needed, many depending on local shelters, which tell us they are preparing for an influx with extra beds and donated supplies, but resources are limited.
We're a county. We're not equipped to do this. We have very limited beds. We have very limited facilities. And so our best effort is to try to get them to family or to their sponsor as quickly as possible.
The migrants released on a humanitarian parole expected to follow up with immigration courts and observe the process set by the Biden administration, which could take months or even years.
Our thanks to Guad Venegas for that report. Now, Homeland Security has announced more than $300 million will be distributed primarily to border communities to help with this increase of migrants looking for shelter.
Well, this morning, major cities across the U.S. are under states of emergency as several places are seeing that increase in migrants. As NBC News national correspondent Gabe Gutierrez explains, the suburbs are also now feeling the impact of the situation as resources are stretched thin coast to coast.
New York City's mayor has been sounding the alarm over the migrant influx here for months. Now, his battle with suburban counties is intensifying. The migrant crisis is stretching far beyond the southern border, from Chicago, where immigrants are sleeping in a police station, to Denver, where they're packing into this parking garage and overwhelming this intake center.
There's nowhere else for these refugees to go.
New buses of migrants also arriving in Philadelphia and Washington, D.C., so-called sanctuary cities, where local authorities have said they won't enforce federal immigration laws. Here in New York, Mayor Eric Adams is now sparring with the suburbs as he blames the Biden administration for the city running out of shelter space.
The national government has turned its back on New York City.
As the city receives up to 1,000 migrants a day, a plan to bus migrants to 2 surrounding counties has now sparked fierce backlash.
I think it was an ambush.
Did you feel blindsided?
Yes, I felt disrespected.
Teresa Kenny is the supervisor of Orangetown, New York, a quiet suburb some 25 miles north of Manhattan. Is this a case of not in my backyard?
No. We have zoning laws because things are appropriate in appropriate locations. That's appropriate for a hotel. It's not appropriate for a homeless center, which will have up to 340 single adult males put in it suddenly.
So local officials have gotten a temporary restraining order, even posting these sheriff's department vehicles outside of this hotel to prevent migrants from being bussed in.
He doesn't know what to do with, and we don't want him up here. We're not a sanctuary city.
In a neighboring county, the first migrant buses arrived, while in the city, emergency shelters like this one at a 1,300-room hotel just steps from Times Square are overflowing. This woman from Colombia tells us at first the conditions were rough, but they've gotten better. How long have you been here? 5. She's now been here 5 months. New York City budget officials estimate that by next year, caring for migrants, including housing them at hotels like this one, will cost taxpayers more than $4 billion. Back to you.
Difficult situation there. Gabe, thank you.
And we're going to stay on this still now to the White House, where the Biden administration is keeping an eye on the situation at the southern border. As we mentioned earlier, President Biden is shifting towards new immigration policies. For the latest, we are joined by NBC News Digital senior White House reporter Peter Nicholas. Peter, good morning. Thanks for being here with us. So first, just tell us what we can expect to hear or see from President Biden on this today, and tell us about this new plan, Title 42's replacement, Title 8.
Well, President Biden has a meeting scheduled today with the president of Spain. So he'll have bilateral meetings and discussions that will involve Ukraine. But this issue is front and center for the White House right now. We saw Secretary Mayorkas come to the White House, Homeland Security Secretary, come to the White House yesterday, try to explain this to reporters. And what we're seeing from the White House is really, I think, an attempt to shift the blame here to Congress, to say that, yes, there's going to be a surge in migrants trying to cross the southern border. Yes, it's going to be chaotic and messy, but it's really up to Congress to provide more resources to the government so that they can handle this influx, and also pass comprehensive immigration reform, measures that would provide, say, a path to legal citizenship for people living in the country illegally. And we haven't really seen Congress muster the will and the appetite to try to pass such legislation. So that's essentially the message coming from the White House.
So before Title 42 expired last night, we had heard from Biden's Homeland Security Secretary, Alejandro Mayorkas. We played some sound from him throughout the morning, including him saying our borders are not open. Tell us more about what we heard and what he's focusing on regarding immigration as we move into this phase this morning.
Well, he's trying to deter people from coming across the border. He understands that there are 10,000, 11,000 people trying to cross every day. I mean, this is well beyond the capacity of the U.S. government to respond to. So he is trying to send out a strong, clear message that people should not attempt to cross the border at this point, that they're now that Title 8 is in place, Title 42 has expired. They're subject to criminal penalties. There's a 5-year ban on reentry if they try to cross the border illegally. So he's trying to use deterrence, sticks rather than carrots, to encourage people not to come and maybe relieve some of the strain and the pressure on U.S. border agents who are just dealing with an untenable situation.
Let you go, Peter. Before I let you go, I do also want to just switch gears here and ask you, while I've got you, about the debt ceiling fight going on in Washington, the drama around it. President Biden was supposed to meet with congressional leaders today, but that's been postponed, according to sources. What can you tell us? I mean, the U.S. is looking to avoid this potentially crippling default next month. We have not really seen any progress. Now a meeting being delayed. What do we know?
Well, what we know is President Biden had said there was going to be a meeting with congressional leaders from both parties today. That meeting has been postponed. The message from the White House is that there are private talks happening at the staff level, so talks haven't completely broken down. But there was a meeting Tuesday, and there was a lot of build-up to it, and there was a lot of anticipation, and really nothing happened. The ball was not advanced, and we only have about 2-3 weeks before the debt ceiling, before we may enter into default unless Congress can lift the debt ceiling. President Biden next week is scheduled to go to Japan and Australia, so he may be out of pocket. So it's clock is ticking.
Peter, thank you so much. We appreciate you joining us. We will have more coverage from the border, as we were discussing just a moment ago, of course, throughout the morning and coming up in our next hour. Thanks, Peter.
Thank you.
And meanwhile, new this morning, the 24-year-old man accused of putting 30-year-old Jordan Neely in a deadly chokehold on a New York City subway last week is expected to turn himself in to authorities today. According to the Manhattan DA's office, Daniel Penny will be charged with second-degree manslaughter. Here's NBC News correspondent Stephanie Gosk with more.
10 days after the death of Jordan Neely was captured on video, the Manhattan DA taking action against the man who put him in a chokehold. Writing in a statement, "We can confirm that Daniel Penny will be arrested on a charge of manslaughter in the second degree. The manslaughter charge carrying a sentence of up to 15 years. Penny, a Marine veteran, put Neely in a chokehold for at least several minutes in an effort to subdue him. One witness says Neely, a homeless subway performer and Michael Jackson impersonator, had been screaming at passengers, saying he was hungry and ready to die when Penny acted. Lawyers for Penny have said he and other passengers on the train were aggressively threatened by Neely, overnight releasing a statement saying Penny risked his own life and safety for the good of his fellow passengers, adding, "We are confident that once all the facts and circumstances surrounding this tragic incident are brought to bear, Mr. Penny will be fully absolved of any wrongdoing." At the time of the incident, Penny was questioned by police and released. But the next day, the medical examiner ruled Neely's death a homicide as a result from compression to his neck, sparking outrage and protests throughout the city. While some are calling Penny's actions vigilantism, others point to the issues of homelessness and mental illness in New York City.
Jordan Neely did not deserve to die. And all of us must work together to do more for our brothers and sisters struggling with serious mental illness.
Neely, who police say was arrested more than 40 times, was known to be struggling with mental illness since his mother's murder in 2007.
Hospitalization is a tactic, it's not a plan. Jordan had been in the hospital. Yeah. If you place someone in a hospital, when they're released with no continuum of care, it doesn't really help.
Today's anticipated arrest potentially easing tensions in a conflicted city.
And our thanks to Stephanie Gosk for that report. Next week, Mayor Adams plans to bring together leaders of homeless outreach services for a summit on improving outcomes for people with serious mental illness. The goal to develop an action plan to get those in crisis the help they need. Jordan Neely, meanwhile, will be laid to rest next week. His family plans to hold a press conference later today. All right, now time for a check of your morning News Now weather.
And we are so lucky to have Michelle Grossman with us on this Friday with all the details. Hi, Michelle. Good morning.
Hi there, guys. So good to see you and happy Friday. Unfortunately, we are tracking some severe weather. We've been tracking it for days. We're going to continue to track this weather over the next several days. It's all due to a big storm in the middle of the country. You kind of see this swirl here, seeing lots of lightning with this. We've been watching this for hours, seeing some heavy rain too. That's where we're seeing those brighter colors, the reds, the oranges, the yellows. Also seeing some cold air on the backside of this, seeing some snow in some spots. So this is a big system bringing the chance for severe storms today. Could see some large hail, some really gusty winds, even a few tornadoes and heavy rainfall. That's going to be the theme over the next several days. And that's going to prompt some flood watches. So that's what we have in place here. Even some flash flood warnings. These will pop in and out. That's where we're seeing flooding happening now or it is imminent. This is what it looks like today. Kind of tells you the whole story, right? It's a busy day. We're looking at the chance for severe storms in the northern plains. We're looking at the chance for severe storms in portions of the southern plains, also looking at that flood risk. We're looking at sunny and warm conditions in the Pacific Northwest. So an early heat wave, temperatures well above normal. That's on that coast. Then on the East Coast, we're looking at a really warm day. Temperatures soaring into the mid to upper 80s. And then kind of sandwiched in between, we're looking at that wet weather. And that's into the Ohio Valley, down into the Tennessee Valley, also portions of the Southeast. So flood watches are in place for 12 million people. We're looking at the chance for rainfall rates of 2 to 3 inches per hour. And get this, we could see 6 to 12 inches of rain over the next several days. And that's why we're concerned for creeks, streams, and also rivers flooding. We're concerned about flash flooding as well. So you want to heed any warnings out there. This is what it looks like in terms of your rainfall totals. Once again, where you see those brighter colors, especially the orange, especially the red, that's where we're looking at the heaviest rain falling in parts of Texas, southwestern Texas, locally 6 to 12 inches of rain. It's all due to this big system that's kind of been lingering. It's going to linger over the next several days. It's going to move off to the north, also to the east, bringing those numerous storms to the plains and also the southeast, bringing heavy rain and flash flooding to portions of the southern plains. Same story for tomorrow. We're going to bring the Midwest into the chance for severe storms, more downpours across the southern plains, lots of rain on your Saturday and then Sunday, Mother's Day. Unfortunately, we're looking at some brunches indoors, so more storms soaking much of Texas. And we're looking at beneficial rain, but it's going to come pretty fast. And we have some really dry ground, so we could see those the water kind of running off. Let's talk about the severe threat because it's Friday. We get a little bit lax when this is into the weekend. So 20 million at risk for large hail, could be baseball size hail, winds gusting up to 60 miles per hour. That could cause some damage, and also the chance of a few tornadoes. Where you see that orange, that's an enhanced risk. It includes Omaha. That's where we could see the likeliest spots for some large hail. But anywhere where you see the yellow, that's a chance of seeing those tornadoes. Here's that warm stretch. I'm going to Taylor Swift tonight. It's going to be hot. Temperatures in the mid to upper 80s. I don't think my outfit's going to go with the mid to upper 80s, but it's all I have. We're looking at temperatures 18 degrees above normal. And then we're also looking at a warm day tomorrow. So, yeah, tonight's the night, guys. Wow. It's not going to rain.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.